Abba Father, Yahuwah, we're just incredibly grateful that you've seen fit to allow us to come together one more time. We thank you, Father, that Eric is feeling better today. Father, I ask that you give him restorative health. And Father, as he continues to teach us and to read for us, I pray, Father, that you will put your wisdom in him. And just thank you, Father, in the name of Yeshua. Amen.
Amen. Hey, can I start this off with a question?
Certainly.
It goes along the line with people visiting heaven, and flying all around. But there's also these other people who have these prophetic utterances. And I just wonder, Yeshua said that a wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given to it except for the sign of Jonah, 3 days dead. But then I'm just wondering, have we as a people ever listened to the prophets? And why do we think we get more? Like we've never, until now, have started to. And it's just on the theme of listening to these 12 prophets. Boy, maybe we should listen to them first before we get new ones. I don't know. And none of these prophets that are speaking are telling us to go back to Torah. So,
well, somebody, just so people know, I don't necessarily go searching the internet very much. People send me things, and I might get a chance to watch 1 out of 100 things that people send. It's hardly anything, but somebody sent. Are you familiar with Trey Smith? He was I think he was a friend or associate of Kim Clement. Trey Smith has done a number of videos, and he's a bit of a character. I guess you could say he's kind of a prophetic voice, or he talks about other people that are prophetic voices. Anyway, I listened to one of his things that he did recently the other day. And, I don't want to talk bad about anybody. A lot of people apparently like him. He has a big production of putting out product, of talking about like the Book of Enoch, and he's put out something on the Exodus, and he has good video, of he's got a whole computer array. And as far as I'm concerned, everything I've done is very low tech or bad tech, and it's just like, I know better, I have a better sense, but it's not about the presentation as much as it's about hopefully the content. But anyway,
I mean, he shows a lot of videos saying Trump should be president. Like I remember seeing a bunch of his videos that Trump's going to be president. It's prophesied.
That's right.
Sure. These lawless preachers.
About. And the question is, it's like, okay, well, this is a prophetic thing, and he's, Kim Clement and blah blah blah. But like you're saying, Kurt, it's like I don't believe I ever heard any of those people in that circle, what in my mind that I would put them into that orientation. I don't recall ever hearing any of them tell us to return to Torah or help us understand his instructions or his words or encouraging us to sit down on Shabbat or call him by his name. They'll mention the word Yeshua once in a while. It's like, I'm not going to try to criticize them. They have their ministry, whatever, that's between them and Elohim. But as you say, do they even sound remotely like the voices of any of these 12 so-called minor prophets? It sounds like a whole different voice to me. But yet I would put that groupage. I don't even know how to put Trey Smith into a group, but I'm just saying I would associate him with Kim Clement, which would associate with signs and wonders and modern movements of spirit and voice and traveling to heaven and miracles. And do they ever say the things that are said in the, besides the minor prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Deuteronomy? I don't know. I don't recall ever hearing any encouragement to go back and look at Yahweh's stuff from any of that. When I say orientation, that direction of voice, let's just say there's 4 directions, north, south, east, west. And you could say all the people on that side, it's like, gosh, that could be coming from anywhere. Well, I'm not trying to group anybody, but I'm just saying, and I, as I said before, I asked my mom once a couple years ago, she was in her 90s, how many people did she ever know in her entire life that had ever encouraged her or even brought the matter up as an issue, that they should regard the name of Yahweh, his day, his Torah, his festivals, his Moedim, to regard the things he said, to consider, to listen to these matters. Is there anybody, or how many? And she knew people from around the world, missionaries and pastors and evangelists and on, and prayer partners all over the different churches. And she said, no, nobody. I said, well, you had one, me. It's like, it was almost like recoil of like, gosh, I was trying to forget that one, or didn't recognize that as one as doing that. I was just some rebellious kid that would never do as he was properly instructed or something. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that imagine that somebody living 90 something years and never once having heard enough for it to stick. I mean, whether or not she ever heard anybody say anything, it never lodged in her memory that somebody said, hey, we should be doing this. And so all of a sudden for us these days to say, how many of what ilk of prophet group, prophecy adherents, proponents, charismatic, whatever you want to call them, these people that fly up to heaven back and forth numerous times, so many times they lost count, as one said, how come they don't come back and say, boy, he really was telling me we ought to get his name right? No, never a matter. We ought to really get his day right and his calendar and his Moedim. No, never.
Mark,
I've never.
Turn off the camera.
So I'm just addressing your question. So, I keep addressing this question, this rhetorical question, how many of who has to do what? So that's the key phrase in there. Has to do what? When? So the answer is, let's say now. It's always now, whether it was 1,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, or right now today. It's like right now, has to do what? Right now. With what heart? With all your heart. That's what he says in Deuteronomy and elsewhere. Return to me with all your heart. Deuteronomy 30 is big on that. For me to do it with all my heart might be a whole different, it's not necessarily a different scale. It might be a whole different reference than somebody else doing it all with their heart, which might look small, but it's kind of like the widow's mite thing. It's in reference to who you are and what you've got to muster. All your heart is a personal application. How many? I believe when Abraham was contending for the righteous ones in Sodom and Gomorrah, when I say that, somebody sent a video and said, hey, what do you think about the lake of fire concept? And this video was a certain minister, I don't even remember his name, out there in the land of Israel, standing where there's brimstone and sulfur, talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's like, I've talked to a few people recently who have said they don't want to believe in a God who would be so mean and nasty, who would just burn people alive, who would throw even the devil into hell as a burning, long-lasting, if not eternal, torment of pain, suffering, physical, mental. They don't want to believe in a God like that. And they wouldn't want to be in heaven with a God who they knew did that to his enemies. And yet, You look at Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's like, okay, well, the lake of fire question, because you just brought this up the other day. Would the same powerful being that could do that to evil angels, fallen, let's just say, a design of creatures that we don't have any comprehension of, whether they're eternal, they're not necessarily humanoids, but they're entities with sentient conscious minds and somehow capacities to do things, and they conduct and perpetuate ruin, wreckage, evil, harm, destruction of all Elohim's ways. Demonic fallen angels, whatever they are, that's the only label we have for them. Would it be bad? Would it be wrong? Would it be unjust? Would it be evil of Elohim to design a place to pitch those guys, toss them into a place they can't escape from, where they get painfully, let's just say, tortured for a long time, if not forever? Oh, that would be bad. We don't want to believe in a God who would do that. Okay, well, what kind of God would you like to believe in? So we've had this discussion before. I'm not sure if I've had it with other people, or I think I've had it on this talk show, so I'm kind of going over it again, but it's a setup for Zephaniah, just so you know. We're going to be talking about Zephaniah. So if I said, look at, the traditional biblical God builds people to have nerves and feelings in their body, central nervous system, and then he uses that very thing he built to torment it, causing them pain and suffering. What the heck? If you lose your life on this earth, your mortal life, and you project into some nether world, some afterlife, and you go to a realm of, let's call it Hades, hell, Gehenna, Sheol, whatever you want to call it, a bad place, and you find yourself with another body. What kind of body? Is it a human body with arms and legs? Who knows? Might look like an octopus or a slug, but your consciousness is inside of it, and now you have to figure out, like a baby being born on earth. It doesn't even know that its own hands and feet belong to itself, and it might poke itself in the eye and go, hey, what's going on? And all of a sudden it realizes, oh, this is my hand, and I can control my hand. So it takes us a while to get familiar with, what did he equip us with? How does it work? How do we use it? How do we protect it? And what brings harm to it? But then to realize that you're in the afterworld, subject to another body of some sort that you have no control over. What are you doing in it? But it's been designed to suffer mental excruciating torments and pain and physical, without yielding, without recovery, without healing, again and again. And it's like, what? That's a sick mind. What a sadistic. On the internet, you can look up and see that there's testimonies of people that have been to hell and experienced this. It's like, yeah, shut up. It's just somebody's trying to sell. It's like, well, I know a few people that have had that experience, and they were at a place like that, out of body. Their body was dead in a vehicle. Their conscious mind was in some sort of nebulous. There was no body, but they felt like it was a body or something. That's all they could say in words. And they were experiencing and seeing others experiencing a tortured place that we might call hell. And it's almost like, gosh, back in the Middle Ages, there was a book written by a guy named Dante, whatever it is, called Dante's Inferno, and he wrote about these 7 levels of hell, and it's like, gee, what an imagination. Or was he given a glimpse? I don't know. I don't know if the world is round or flat. I don't know if we ever went to the moon or not, and I don't know if there's hell and a lake of fire or not, but the Bible talks about it. And if you say, okay, I believe in the God of the Bible, the guy that created the heavens and the earth, made humankind in his own image, whatever that means. Does it mean physically or capacity-wise to think? And do stuff. And he talks about this heaven and hell. Of course, we can look all through the scriptures, and it never really says we're going to go to heaven. It says the New Jerusalem is coming back to the earth. There's the new heaven and the new earth, and the earth was made for the righteous to dwell on forever. And so this concept of heaven and hell is a Christian construct. And who knows where you'd have to go back in and filter out. It's like, well, what's right and what's wrong? What's Abraham's bosom? Is it heaven? Is it the paradise? Is it, gosh. You see, over the years, we have bits and pieces of the story from the Bible and bits and pieces of stories from other cultures that get amalgamated, mixed in, and we forget that they're not in the Bible. And what we have inherited here in the year 2022 is a big potpourri, a stew, was it jambalaya? Is that something where they take all these kind of unclean things and mix them together and make a really great tasting Cajun concoction? It's kind of what we have. But we think it's just true. We think, oh, that's the reality. Is there going to be a rapture or not? I have no idea. I have a good friend who absolutely believes the rapture could happen any day. He believes it should have happened on Yom Teruah, but it didn't. But he thought it was going to happen on the Yom Teruah last year, but it didn't. We're still here. And it's like, yeah, but any day now. I remember hearing that my entire life. Any day now, the rapture could happen. And other people say there's not going to be a rapture. It's a false hope. So what are we supposed to do? I don't know. I'm not going to say whether there's going to be a rapture or not. And it's like, is part of the concept of the rapture that if there is going to be one, you have to believe in it in order for it to happen? Isn't that kind of like Peter Pan? Believe you can fly and you can fly. If you don't believe you can fly, hey, you're going to fall out that window when you jump. So you better believe. If there's going to be a rapture and Yeshua appears in the sky and all of a sudden we poof, just float up, well, glory, hallelujah. Good enough for me. If he wants to take us that way out of here, it's like, give me a ticket, sign me up. I'm not going to pin my expectations on that, though. However, I know he could do that, but what's he going to do? And I bring up this point about the rapture, not only because it's been mentioned in conversation, my friend, a number of times, but there's a couple words in Zephaniah that almost sounds like, hey, that's describing a rapture. It doesn't say so in the Stone's Tanakh English translation, but it's all a matter of how you look at the words. We'll get into that. But so the question is, if you say, listen, you hear the Christians say this, the Jews say that, the Messianics say that, this blah, blah, the Paleo-Hebrew supposedly says this other thing. Look, just invent a picture of your own God, what you want him to be like, what you hope he's like, what you want him to, how he will exercise justice. Is he going to just speak the word poof and these evil entities, whether they're angels or humans, cease to exist forever? No consciousness, no pain? Or is he going to torment them for a while? Like a little kid tormenting a bug with a magnifying glass or with pins. It's like, why are people do stuff like that? Well, and then he'll just get tired of that and say, okay, that's enough. I'll just then quench their conscious existence. Well, if you get to invent your own God, even if he has quite a few attributes like the biblical God, but if you think that you are entitled to pick and choose what your God, who you want to believe in, is like in order for you to believe in him and be his worshipful servant, that's idolatry. You're inventing your own God. And it's no different than carving an idol, like some god from India has an elephant nose. Some god in some other tradition has 7 dragon heads. Somebody else has, it's like, whoa, just invent him to be like whatever you want. It's all just picturesque metaphor anyway, isn't it? The interesting thing about the scripture is that Yahuwah Zavot, the Elohim of Israel, gives us in his language, in his Torah, in his Nevi'im, his prophets, he gives us all the information, the full scope, but yet it's very limited. And he says, this is who I am. This is what I will do, why I do what I do. And that's it. And your job, Israel, you who will be my people, your job is to take what I say at face value fully. Take it or leave it. And regard me, trust me, believe in me. Don't add, don't take away. Doesn't matter whether you like it, but you better love me. You better love me. I was talking to somebody the other day and mentioned this story that another friend told me. I might have mentioned it on one of these talks, but some little kid going to a Catholic nunnery, a little 6 or 7-year-old kid knocks on the door, and all of a sudden this big door opens up and this nun looks down at him, and he's quite traumatized. He's never been there before. And what is it, little boy? And he said, my mommy told me to come here and go to school. Have you teach me? And this nun says, do you love God? I don't know God. Who's God? And then he sees this human nailed to the side of a wall, bleeding and hanging there. And he says, who's that? And the nun said, God did that to his son. I love God. I love God. Wow. It's like the carrot and the stick. If he would do that to his own son, what the heck is he going to do to us? Unless you love him. Well, yeah, what does it mean to love him? Whatever it means, I'll do it. I'll do it. Quick, just tell me what to do. What are we supposed to do? Well, so if we say, well, I love God just so long as he behaves the way I want him to. Well, that's kind of like some parent saying, I love my children just so long as they do what I say. Other than that, I'm going to nail them to the side of the barn. Throw darts at them. What? Well, that's kind of like what they did to Yeshua. Who is this monster that supposedly is kind and loving that we're supposed to like? And yet he says, gives us stories, words through his prophets that this is what he's going to do. And yet I've heard just even in the last week or two that some people that have made numerous trips up to the heavens back and forth recently and ongoing are now saying, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but they're saying, this whole business of God punishing people, it's a misappropriation of his identity. That he's not going to. He doesn't do that. That's all bogus, fallacious. What is the word? A fallacy. It's false. That's not him. Well, then who the heck is it? The whole Bible, and we've mentioned, there's a. So I mentioned the other day as I was going through these minor prophets that it seems like, boy, every one of them start off talking about this bad stuff. At least, 8 or 9 of them. Then you get to Zephaniah. Well, there's another one that starts off with a bunch of bad stuff happening. Well, you get to Haggai. Well, nothing bad's happening. Well, yeah, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. A bunch of stuff, bad stuff's happening. And it's like, why would you got 12 books of the minor prophets? Why would 10 of them spend most of the writing telling you about all the bad stuff that's going to happen unless you do the right stuff? Well, then tell us what the right stuff is, would you? Gosh, just tell us what we're supposed to do. How many? Technically all of us, but any of us, each of us. Doesn't matter if there's anybody else. You have to take on if you are the only responsible party on the face of the earth, like Noah, like Moshe, like Joseph, like Abraham. What if you are the one and only? like Elijah. And then Yahweh says, hey, come on, calm down, man. I got 7,000 more. You don't even know them, but just relax. But he had to think as if the entire burden of the kingdom, you might say the maintenance of the true word of Elohim to humanity, was his personal burden to maintain in his lifetime, as if there was nobody else to corroborate, to help him. I mean, how do you take on that mind? I had somebody, a dear friend from long ago, said to me one time, do you think you're the only person on the world, in the planet, that knows the truth? I've had actually a few people say that to me, as if they thought that I was some arrogant bastard to think that much of myself. Really, you think that's what I'm doing? Or am I just simply trying to take on the mind of Elohim saying, oh, you better take this seriously. And you better take this so seriously as if you were the watchman, and at your voice, you either alert the people to the coming hordes of destruction and wake them up so that they can prepare against it, or the city gets slaughtered and it's all on you, their blood on your head. Yeah, well, you better take this to heart. And somebody's going to disdain me for that? Disdain me. Numerous times I've heard that accusation of who do you think you are? And it's like, I don't think I'm anybody other than Yahweh apparently let me see this, and it's like, now I've got a responsibility. So how many? It doesn't matter. Let's just say we won. Just say you. How many of who? You. Somebody that wants to be his people. Somebody that says, I want to listen to your voice. You told us to listen to your voice. Let your voice speak. How do I hear your voice? Let me hear your voice. Allow me, please, to hear your voice. What's it saying? Well, just quiet down and meditate. And listen to his voice. Is that where his voice is to be found? Remember, Elijah was up in the mountain hiding, and he was exhausted, but he was hiding, and there's this canyon out in front of him, and a fire whipped through, and an earthquake, and a wind, and Elohim's voice wasn't in any of those. But then he heard a still small voice. It's like, oh, there's this voice. Well, that time that was his voice. Does that mean always? Is that where you find his voice? Or do you find his voice written in this Hebrew scripture? What I was going to mention in Haggai tells us where to find his voice. I'll just mention that real quick. There's not a whole lot to talk about in Haggai. We're going to mainly talk about Zephaniah, but Haggai 1, verses 5 to 11, and Haggai 2, verses 14 to 19. Here, I'll just read this here real quick. Haggai 1, 5 to 11. And it's not written so that you'd even necessarily recognize it. Starting back at verse 3, and the word of Yahuwah came by the hand of Haggai the prophet, saying, is this a time for yourselves to sit in your paneled houses while this house remains in ruins? So the whole book of Haggai is saying, hey, listen, you guys came back from the Babylonian incarceration, the exile, and you came back to Jerusalem, and now you've fixed up your houses, you rebuilt the wall, but the temple still lays in ruin. And it's like, does he really care about the temple? Well, the whole book of Haggai is written as if he does care about the temple. And other people say, hey, the temple is our human bodies. That's where he dwells. It's not about the physical building, that edifice. And it's like, but the book of Haggai talks about it as if it was. So make of it what you will. But he says, verse 5, so now thus says Yahweh Zavot, set your heart to your ways, or in brackets, consider, set your heart to look at your ways. Well, this is then, how do you hear his voice? You have sown much, but bring in little. Eating without being satisfied, drinking without quenching thirst, dressing yet no one is warmed, and whoever earns money earns it for a purse with a hole. It's like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. You work and you work and you work, and yet your benefits or your profits are taken away. Is it inflation? Is it taxes? Is it fines and penalties? Is it Visa card charges? Is it, your septic tank goes bust, your Your house catches fire, you know, your animal has to go to the clinic. It's like something always happens. And Yahweh's basically saying, that's his voice. Can you hear it? Verse 7, thus says Yahweh as a vote, set your heart on your ways. Set your heart on your ways. Set your heart on your ways. Is that the same as meditate? Is that the same as listen to his voice? Is that the same as learning how to read scripture? Set your heart to your ways. Somehow you have to look at how you're conducting your life, where you put your priorities, your values, your time, your attention, your efforts. Okay, so they're building their houses. They're building them out of material that will endure. They're cleaning up their yard so the HOA won't get on their back. They can look around and say, I'm being a good steward. Washing their car, being careful not to pollute the ecosystem with non-biodegradable soap. What's the problem? Verse 8 of Haggai 1. Go up to the mountain and bring wood and build a temple. I will be pleased with it, and I will be honored, says Yahweh. He wants them to stop the urban infrastructure. Go get wood and build a temple. Well, I'm going to now take what seems like it's a physical, actual command and say, metaphorically, it's what we're doing by this very video. Each of us, I could be out doing some beneficial work, or I could sit there and, if I'm not feeling well, drink some hot tea and try to recover and just relax, or just set my mind on wonderful things. And it's like, there's nothing more wonderful to set my mind upon than these things. So is this the same as going up to the mountains, get wood, and build the temple? Verse 8. If I look at that, it says, Ayin Lamed Vav. That's, I remember Ayin Lamed is a yoke, but that means Aliyah is like to raise up or lift up, success, prosperity, higher dignity. So that's the root word, Ha-har, the mountain, but har is also noble thoughts, to be pregnant. Hey, Resh is to be pregnant, like a mountain sticking up, swelling up. It's a notable thing. Eber, Ayin Bet Resh, the word for Hebrew, also means to be pregnant. So you could make a correlation of like a little bit of geometry and algebra. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. If Hebrew equals mountain equals pregnant equals noble, lifted up, noteworthy, not just thoughts, but being filled with the life of his seed within us, then that's what the mountain is about. It's not about the mountain itself. And then, hey, bet aleph tav mem. Bet aleph is the word for arrive or come in or enter. And then ayin zadi, etz, well, that's wood. And beno, that's the word for build, but it's also understand. But ayin zadi, see, it's not just wood. It also means opened eyes or closed eyes. It means to understand. If pezadi is explode, mouth open, then by similar formula of the spelling of the word, ayin zadi can be your eye flourishing. It's like, oh, I get it. Bet is the next word, habet. Hey, bet yod tav. Well, so they say, well, that's the word temple. The house. It was referred to as mikdash, that's temple, or hayikal, that's temple, or habet, that's temple, but none of them are really the word that we think of as temple. There are all these other words that are told us to mean the temple. But the word bet, as we've said before, is a similar synonym with the word aleph, and they both mean taught, trained, and domesticated of Elohim's house, which is to say, you know the rules of the house. Remember when I was a kid living in Los Angeles, You open the door, you walk in, there's carpeting, and, well, there's a mat. You can wipe your shoes off on the mat, but otherwise, whatever's on your shoes gets on the carpeting, and that's just what you do. And then there was these weird people. They looked funny, they talked funny, and they had funny customs. When you walked up to the house, the first thing you did was take your shoes off inside the room. It's like, what? Take your shoes off? Never heard of such a thing. Preposterous. Take your shoes off. It's like, listen, do you know what you've been walking in? Through the streets, through the yard where the dog just was, and now you're going to walk that in on our carpeting? Are you the uncouth barbarian? What do you think we are? Oh, gosh, that makes a lot of sense. What a great idea. Take your shoes off before you come into the house, or just when you step in the door. And then I've known other people that had an array of various sizes of slipper type things there for any guest to put on. And it's like, well, that's mighty accommodating. What a great thing. That's to become accustomed to the protocols of that house. And so for Elohim to talk about Har Habet, the mountain of the temple, is it to have his seed alive within you, Har, impregnated with nobility, taught, trained, and domesticated as the way his house works? And to have your eye sprout, that's the wood, Ayin Zadi. Well, if that's the case, then whether or not you get to fly to heaven and come back, how come you don't talk about or know or promote? Maybe you know personally, but you never talk about it publicly? His name, his day, his ways, his Torah? I don't get it. Something doesn't add up for some reason. I don't know. And then it says, Vav Aleph Resh Zadi Hey. That's verse 8. I will be pleased with it, and I will be honored, says Yahweh. That word, I'm just trying to show you how you could, part of the comprehension of the language here. I will be pleased with it. Vav Aleph Resh Zadi Hey hyphen Bet Vav. Well, Bet Vav, the Vav suffix, he, it, they, Bet prefix, in, on, with, among, through, against. So Bet Vav is with it. And the word I will be pleased is Aleph Resh Zadi Hey. Well, Aleph Resh Zadi is the word earth, or Resh Zadi means run. I will run. So the picture of earth, I will run. I will run this gamut, this course, is translated here, I will be pleased. In other words, it's something you want to do with this vigorous heart of enthusiasm. And yet they don't tell you it's the word earth, eretz. You have to look at the word and break it down and figure out why the word earth is translated, I will be pleased. And I'm saying this because of a few other things in the book of Zephaniah that proves or suggests that this very act that we're doing in this discussion of these videos, this Erictology, is exactly what it's been talking about the whole time, and yet nobody seemed to know it. Nobody else is talking about it for whatever reason. We're talking about it, and there they go. And it's like, yeah, there we go. Great. We're actually doing, fulfilling, accomplishing, present tense what he's talked about for centuries, that apparently has remained hidden, secret, locked up, occluded. Nobody has known about or promoted or encouraged of each other. Why? Well, under the curse. The curse was such that not only would we be overlorded and tormented by enemies without rescue, without hope, because the verses that tell us where the solution is, where the hope is, where the secret key of getting out of the jail cell is locked up in Yahuwah's words. And he was going to keep that blocked, us blinded to it, so we couldn't see it until our eyes blossom to see it, which is this stuff, which is this very study as far as I can see. And I'll show you why. I can see it in Zephaniah. And Zephaniah is only 3 chapters, so it's kind of a small thing, kind of like Habakkuk was. And I know we're talking about Haggai here, but I just want to show you that even a small little thing like in Haggai, we can open it up and say, gosh, there's a whole lot going on with this. And I will be pleased and I will be honored, said Yahweh. You looked for much, but there's little. You bring it home and I blow upon it. What? I blow upon it. I thought it was the devil. I thought it was the IRS. I thought it was the neighbor's dog ate the cabbage out of my garden that I just spent all season growing. What do you mean it was you? What did I do? Why is this? Nam Yahweh, Zavot. Who? When he says Nam Yahweh, most of the time, but when he says Nam Yahweh, Zavot, it's like, that's like really like that signet seal illuminated. Because of my temple, which is ruined, while you run each to his own house. Again, was it his temple that's ruined, or was it the teachings of his Torah, his ways, his house? Which is all this stuff we're looking at that's talked about in his word. And one of the first things you learn when you start looking at his word, his name, his day, the testimonies of his identity, of his intent, of his covenant, which is the Moedim, his instructions, his commands. And so we keep going over the same thing over and over, same thing, and again and again. I involve Dalit, again and again, repeatedly, forcefully. It's a very small group of things. His name, his day, his Moedim, Emet, Chesed, Mishvat, Tzedakah, truth, kindness, justice, and righteousness, balanced scales of equity. What you do gets come back on you. Help the widow and the orphan and the unfortunate. Quit ripping off and lying to your neighbor. Trust him. A very small list of things we're supposed to do. Is that his temple, which is still laying in ruins? Well, we could look at today and say, well, search the internet. There's thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours of teachings. How to be a good Christian, how to be a good godly man. Are any of them talking about rebuilding his house, his temple? If your body is a temple, then you should eat well, but is that what he's talking about? Verse 10, therefore, because of you. What? Because of me? The heavens withhold from dew, and the land withholds its produce. What? How many of us are the cause, or how many of us could be the turnaround for nature to respond? Verse 11, I have declared a drought upon the land and upon the mountains and upon the grain and upon the wine and upon the oil and whatever the earth brings forth, and upon the people and upon the animal, upon all the toil of your hands. You have declared a curse. He didn't even say they were doing evil stuff. He didn't say they were doing bad stuff. He said they were building their houses, they were working, they were laboring. Didn't say they were doing injustice. The guy that was talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, the guy that did that video, he was going on and on about the, let's just say the LGBTQ, RST, whatever the alphabet letters might represent. That's why God hates those guys. Read the book of Jasher. It'll tell you it's not that. That was not the reason why the destruction came upon not just Sodom and Gomorrah, but all the cities of the plain there. And the destruction's still there. It was like the Garden of Eden. That area, that what's now so burned, parched, dry desert, arid, nothing can grow, was like the Garden of Eden for lush vegetation. That's why Lot wanted to go there. And you'd never know there was ever vegetation there now. But he does talk about, Elohim talks about someday is going to come when it's all going to be regrown. Hasn't happened yet. Is it going to be regrown in the millennium? Is the millennium on the planet Earth or off the planet in some heavenly realm? Well, if he promises that there's going to be 1,000 years in the face of the earth, something has to happen. Is it a pole shift? Is it that the earth gets hit by an asteroid and there's convolutions in nature, convulsions where everything goes, and it's like, somehow that land's got to regrow like the Garden of Eden, because that's been prophesied. It can't be the end of the world because that place is still dried up. And the Euphrates River is drying up. And people were saying the Mississippi is drying up. Why? Is it because of global warming? You see, you read Haggai and say, yep, global warming. Well, they didn't have any carbon emissions back then unless they're burning firewood. Yahweh says, I have declared a drought upon the land. How many of our leaders, whether they're religious or political or philosophical, scientific, have suggested that somebody needs to go back and listen to the teachings of Yahweh's Zavot, the Elohim of Israel, and do what he said in order to provoke him to change? Why would he change? Remember, everything he does is mishpat, balancing of scales. He says that his throne, now that means the position of his domination, his reign, of his kingdom, sits on Mishpat and Zadokah. So everything's based on balancing scales. So if he says, you're not paying attention to my teaching of my house, the way my house rules are conducted, therefore, the mishpat is, though everything else let's pretend that though everything else you're doing is correct, is acceptable, you're not hurting anybody. What I was saying about Sodom and Gomorrah, it was all injustice they were doing. It wasn't about the sodomy, it was injustice, the horrible, brutal things they did to strangers and other people that came into their city, the book of Jasher talks about. So that's not why he's doing this. So why is he doing this? It says everything has to be balance of scales. See, in Yahweh's world, he can't just do something because he feels like it. He could, but that would be some other God. Yahuwah says everything I do is based on balancing scales. So as we talked about last week, he said, listen, I've given you something to put in your side of the scale. So soon as you do, like when I was a little kid, you know, your parents give you a quarter to put in the offering plate. Here, put this in the offering plate. Really? Well, if you said, put in the offering plate, nobody knows. I'm going to pretend like I do, but I'm going to take it and slip it in my pocket. That way I can have something. I don't believe I did that, but what I'm saying is you could do that. Why does he give us sit down on the Sabbath day? Because that's what we then are putting in our side of the scales of balance. He said, every time you guys sit down on the Sabbath day, not only is it proof you're listening to me, it's proof you're my people, but you just did what was required to fill your side of the scales of balance. So now I can do what I said I'd do on my side of the scale of balance, take out your enemy, make nature cooperate, give you all the provisions you need, so forth and so on. So our enemy's greatest tactic, weapon, is to change the Sabbath day so nobody knows. So everybody's keeping the wrong Sabbath day, so nobody can put the token in on the right day to fill the scale of balance. It's kind of like Cain and Abel. Abel offered a killed lamb as an offering, and it was accepted. And Abel did that, and Cain says, hey, listen, I grow veggies, so I'm going to bring you piles and piles of great vegetables and put those on the altar. It's like, sorry, that's not what was required. It doesn't work. Counts for nothing. Shut up! What do you mean counts for nothing? You know how hard I work to put that? That's a picture of the whole dang Christian church for 2,000 years, if you ask me. Cain, that's right. We're not going to give you the Sabbath day and calling you by your name. We're going to call you Lord God that I love, Jesus, and we're going to put the regard of Sunday as the altar, the offering on the altar of sacrifice, and you better take it, or you're the jerk. And it's like, then Cain got upset, and Elohim said to him, hey, what are you getting mad about? Don't get mad at me. Don't you realize that evil sits there at the door waiting to grab you? You have a bad attitude. Just do what's right and everything will go fine. See, Yahweh didn't come up to Cain and say, yeah, see, you're demon spawn. You're reptilian. You can never succeed. You'll never do good. He didn't say that. He said, just do the right thing and you'll succeed. Do what I said and it'll all work. So I don't believe that Cain was serpent seed, just based on that. Yahweh never accused him of it. What I'm saying is, it's easy to say Cain was a big, stupid jerk putting vegetables on the altar compared to Abel. And so it's always nice to associate yourself with Abel instead of Cain. But what we've given him is what Cain gave him. For whatever the reason, doesn't matter the reason, what has happened is that we were told, this is what you give him on his altar. Dear Lord God Jesus, we will not work on Sunday. When I was a kid, we didn't work on Sunday. The stores weren't even open on Sunday. Sorry, Sunday's not the holy day. Wrong day. How do you know? Go back and learn his instructions of his house. So not until you come back to learn the Torah of the Bet of Yahweh's Avot, Elohim of Israel, can you realize why is there a drought? Why is there rivers drying up? Why isn't things working? So see here, hidden in Haggai is the answer to the problem, if you know how to read it. All the toil of your hands, the peoples, the animals, gosh. And then if you look at chapter 2 of Haggai, verses 14 and 19, says, Haggai spoke up and said to the Kohanim, so is this people and so is this nation before me, Nam Yahweh, and so is all their handiwork. What they offer there will be defiled, but nevertheless consider the situation from this day and previously, before stone was placed upon stone in the sanctuary. In other words, before you guys started to build the temple, this is what was going on. Though you didn't know it, you didn't recognize it, you never even thought that I was doing something. And then all of a sudden, just mark the note on the calendar and realize, as soon as you started to place stone upon stone, precept upon precept, matter upon matter, Sabbath day upon Sabbath day that we have kept, moed after moed, that we have regarded unto his glory, his kavod, his name. Verse 16, Haggai 2. When they would come to a grain heap of what should have been 20 units, but it was only 10, when one would come to the wine press to draw out 50 units from the pit, but there was only 20, gosh, he had been causing less than half to be available, just punching holes in leaks in everything. Verse 17, I had struck you with blast and blight and hail upon all your handiwork, yet you're not returning to me, Nam Yahweh. He says, haven't you noticed that nothing's been working? Why don't you return? It's like, it reminds me of that cartoon. Maybe you can find that. It's a famous cartoon. It was in the 70s, and I saw it more recently, a few years back, but it shows cops beating up a protester. And it says, the beatings will continue until the morale improves. Yeah, corrupt, tyrannical government, the cops. It's like, no, it's Yahweh himself. Everything you do is going to turn to mush until you return to me. The beatings will continue until you return to my instructions, my words, my bet. Verse 18, set now your heart to consider, the word to consider is in brackets, so that's added, but I'll just read the Stone's Tanakh here. From this day and before, from the 24th of the 9th month, back to the day when the foundation of the sanctuary were laid, set your heart to consider. Is there any more seed in the silo? Even the grapevine and the fig tree and the pomegranate tree and the olive tree that had not borne? But from this day on, I will provide blessing. Wow, really? And then he goes on, 5 minutes. This is the last verse of Haggai. I am shaking the heavens and the earth. I will upset the thrones of kingdoms and destroy the strength of kingdoms of the nations. When? Where? Why? How? I will turn over a chariot and its drivers. Now imagine seeing tanks and helicopters coming at you and jets. Oh gosh, here we go. And all of a sudden they crash. They run into each other. Like all of a sudden their computer systems fail and they spin out and it's like, whoa, what's going on here? Yahweh says, listen, don't worry about them. I'll take out your enemies when the time comes. And Zephaniah talks about that. We're going to get to that in the second hour. And the horses and their riders will fall down. That's knights on horseback. He's going to take out the chariots with their team of horses and the horses with the cavalry. He's going to make them run into each other. The horses step in a hole, throw the riders off. He's going to just bust up the entire assault. But think about that. He didn't say, I will stop them from ever launching an assault. He's going to let them, their leaders, the bad guys, our enemies, those who hate Yahweh. But Yahweh put them in power to be our enemies because we wouldn't listen to them. So you have to know how to read this book and realize it all goes back to whether Israel will listen to what Yahweh said. So you look at the world affairs, whether it's the economy, whether it's the military, whether it's the natural resources, or whether it's the weather, and say, oh, those guys. No, wait a minute. It's Israel. I'm not talking about the people in the government on the other side of the world over there in the Mediterranean. It's us scattered across the face of the earth that claim to be or want to be his people. It's our fault. No, yes, it's our fault. It's been our fault, but that means we have the solution in our hands. Kind of like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz with the ruby slippers. And at the very end of the movie, she says, I just want to go back to Kansas. I want to go home. And the good lady there says, hey, you could have gone home anytime. Ha, didn't anybody tell you the rules? All you do is click your heels of the ruby slippers together and say, I want to go home, and boop, you're back. What? It's like this. Yahweh says, didn't anybody tell you the rules? All you had to do was listen to my voice. Learn the rules of the house. Sit down on the Sabbath day. That's all you had to do. Because sitting down on the Sabbath day was empowered from the beginning as the key, the linchpin, as it were, the trigger. In fact, we're going to see that in Zephaniah where he says there's this thing which is the pall of the mishpat, the activating force which will cause Yahweh's mishpat to happen. It's kind of like setting a rat trap. You know, you put the bait in, then you put the arm down, and if you bump this, wham! The wham is Yahweh's mishpat. What is it that triggers the whole thing to happen? Israel to listen and do the terms of the covenant, which is Shema, Shomer, and Asha, Zadika, and Bar Anu, or Bakash Anu. We're going to get to that in just a moment. We're going to stop in just 1 second. Let me just read the last sentence here. But the riders will fall down, one by the sword of the other. There's a few different stories in the Old Testament where these hundreds of thousands of the enemy against just a few, you can count them, people of Israel, and Yahweh put a fury, a mind of madness into the soldiers of the enemy, and they killed each other. He's going to do it again. Verse 23 of Haggai 2, on that day, Nam Yahweh Zavot, I will take you, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, my servant, Nam Yahweh, I will make you like my signet ring. What the heck does that mean? For you I have chosen, Nam Yahweh Zavot. I'm not going to, that's the end of the chapter, end of the book. I'm not going to say a whole lot about that, other than the interesting thing is that the word Semitic is my signet ring, I believe. No, I will make you. Shin Mem Tav Yod Kaf. I will make you. Well, Shem, name, place, renown, reputation, location. Tav Yod, I have shemmed, and then Kaf suffix you, but that's the word Semitic. Semitic, well, that's the name of the Hebrew alphabet, the Semitic alphabet, the Semitic language, the Semitic culture. And that simply translated the word, I will make you. Does it mean I have appointed you? I've established you? I've given you reputation? Or does it mean my reputation is based on me accomplishing this? See, again, you try to read the English and it's going to put your mind in a different place. But what he's saying is all the bad guys have been empowered. They've mustered their army. They've laid their battle plans. They've equipped themselves. They've got the armaments. They've got sharp weapons and fast horses. And they're fed and fueled and pumped up. And they're coming. And he's going to make them trip and fall, stumble over themselves, and consume each other. And I say that because if you know what's going on in the news these days, very similar things happening. And so the question is like, oh no, are we at the edge of the tribulation? Or are we at the edge of this happening, which Zephaniah is going to play into chapter 3, verse 8. So we're going to take a break now.